Hey, so in this video, I'm going to teach you married people the one word, the one word that you need to know to enable your family, perhaps, to save millions of dollars of death tax. Okay, so some final regulations were issued recently by the Treasury Department, and I got nothing better to do on a Sunday afternoon than to pour through those Treasury Department regulations to make sure I'm giving you the right information. But I've been looking at this for a while and finally really realized how important this is, and realizing that a lot of families are going to wind up paying a lot of unnecessary estate tax because they didn't take advantage of what I'm about to tell you. So to set it all straight, this has to do with the federal estate tax. When somebody dies, it's a 40% tax. And I'm going to give you some thresholds here. I'm making this video here in 2020. And for people who pass away in 2020, this is a big number I'm about to tell you. So, but really it applies to many, many people, more than you'd think, what I'm about to tell you. But the 2020 estate tax basic exclusion amount is, for 2020, people who die, $11.58 million. That's adjusted for inflation each year. So for example, last year, back in 2019, when people passed away, the first $11.4 million that they had was exempt from the estate tax. And then there was a 40% estate tax on the fair market value of everything they had in excess of $11.4 million. And again, adjusted for inflation, 2020, $11.58 million. Okay, so let's, because I'm going to give you an example in a moment that uses these figures. Let's fast forward to the year 2026, when this estate tax law, what they call sunsets. And in 2026, the estate tax exclusion amount reverts back to $5 million adjusted for inflation. It's probably going to be around $6 million in 2026. So 2020, people pass away. The first $11.58 million is exempt from estate tax. But if they happen to pass away in 2026, only the first $6 million that they have will be exempt from the estate tax. All right. So now, with that, laying that foundation, let me give you an example where there's a mess up, and an example where this one word was used correctly. Okay. So in our example where I know this is going to happen over and over and over again, and it's going to cause families to pay millions of dollars of unnecessary tax. Let's say Barry's, a married husband. Barry and his wife, Pamela, let's say they have children. It doesn't really matter how many they have. But Barry dies this year, 2020, and his estate is valued at $6 million, the value of everything he owned. And when I say Barry had an estate of $6 million, let's say Barry and Pam had a total combined estate of $12 million. They owned it 50-50. Perhaps it was community property. So Barry's estate is worth $6 million. So after Barry dies, Pam, his surviving wife, goes to see Larry the lawyer to get his estate settled. And Barry and Larry the lawyer says, Pam, I'm sorry that your husband Barry passed away. I'm going to help you, take care of everything and get his estate settled. Let me just give you a couple of quick points, Pam. Larry goes on to say, look, Pam, there's, we have a 40% estate tax, but Larry's estate was $6 million. And for people who die in 2020 this year, the first $11.58 million is exempt from the estate tax. And since Barry's gross estate is less than the basic exclusion amount of $11.58 million, Pam, we don't even have to report anything on an estate tax return. We don't have to file an estate tax return. You don't owe any estate tax. That's just, we can skip all of that. The IRS isn't required to, we're not required to send any information to the IRS about Barry's estate. And so Pam says, whew, boy, thank you so much, Larry. I don't know what I'd do without you. You've been such a big help. You've been our family's lawyer for a long time, gotten us through all of our, families, divorces and and speeding tickets, and when we bought a house, you helped us close on the title. Wow, you've been so helpful to our family. So Barry leaves everything to Pam, and now Pam has the entire $12 million. She has, her $6 million, and she got $6 million from Barry. Pam has $12 million. Pam lives for 6 more years, and then she dies in 2026 when our basic estate tax exclusion amount has reverted back to $6 million. And now in 2026, from 2020 when Pam had $12 million, that was all invested. And so over that 6-year period, Pam's estate grew from $12 million to, let's call it $17.58 million when Pam dies in 2026. And now Pam's kids go to see Larry the lawyer to get Pam's estate settled. And I realize this is a large estate, and only a select percentage of America have that large estate. But nonetheless, this is really important. Stay with me. Pam's kids go to see Larry the lawyer. Boy, Larry, thank you so much for helping our family through this. Larry says, I'm sorry that your mother Pam passed away. Larry says, I took care of everything when your father Barry died back in 2020. Now your mother has passed away. Wow, she has $17.58 million. And look, I just checked the estate tax exclusion amount. It's $6 million now in 2026. So that means that $11.58 million of your mother's estate is subject to the 40% tax. She had $17.58 million when she died. She has a $6 million basic exclusion amount. That leaves $11.58 million subject to a 40% tax. Larry the lawyer says, kids, y'all gonna have to cough up a check to the IRS within the next nine months since your mother died. And that check's gonna have to be $4.632 million. And the kids are like, dang, that's a lot of money. And then Larry the lawyer goes on to say, well, kids, like they say, there's only 2 things that are certain in life, death and taxes. And the kid's like, oh yeah, okay. So they wind up paying $4.632 million of federal estate tax. Okay, so that's one scenario that will play out many times over in America in lawyers' offices over the next decade or longer. But now I got to give you the other scenario, kind of very, very, very similar facts, except for the fact that Pam is a little more educated when she goes to see Larry after her husband, Barry, dies. So what happens, Larry dies, same facts, same figures. Barry has $6 million when Barry dies. Pam goes to see Larry the lawyer to get Barry's estate settled. Same thing. Larry says, Pam, so sorry to hear of the death of Barry, but I'm going to help you get everything straight. He left everything to you. There's no requirement that a federal estate tax return be filed because Barry had a $6 million estate. The exemption amount is $11.58 million. We can skip that whole step. That ought to save you some time and expense that we don't have to do that. And Pam looks at Larry the lawyer and says one word. She says at that point, portability. And then Larry kind of does a double take. He says, I beg your pardon? And Pam says, portability. And Larry says, look, I know, Pam, you're grieving and you might, you've got all kind of stuff going on, but I really don't know why you keep saying that word. And Pam says, well, I watched a video, and in that video, they told me to, after my spouse died with a fairly large estate, anywhere from $2 million to $12 million, the video told me to walk into the lawyer's office and say one word, portability. And then Pam goes on to say, the lawyer talked about something like on that video that if we do file an estate tax return and make some election, that'll save my kids a lot of estate tax when I die. And so stuff starts going through Larry's mind as he's got the speeding tickets on one side of his desk and the divorce cases on another side of his desk. Got a couple of real estate closings over here. And Larry says, well, Pam, I know I've been the family lawyer for a long time, and you keep talking about portability. Tell you what, let me look into it and I'll get back with you. So Pam leaves and Larry watches this video, and then he gets in touch with some other lawyers or accountants that he thinks, might be able to shed some light on whether there's something he needs to address here. And so he realizes a few things, and then he gets Pam back in the office, and of course he tries to cover his tracks. And so Larry tells Pam something like, well Pam, I know you came in here and you kept using that word portability when you came in, and Pam, I'm sure I would have caught it as we got through the Barry's estate settlement, but I'm glad you mentioned it. I would have caught it, but here's the deal with portability. He would have said, while there is no requirement that an estate tax return be filed on Barry's estate's behalf because his gross estate was less than the $11.58 million 2020 basic exclusion amount. And yes, he did leave everything to you, Pam, and quite frankly, from an estate tax standpoint, his gross estate was $6 million, but he left everything to you. And so his net estate for estate tax purposes was zero because his entire estate that he left to you, Pam, qualifies for the estate tax marital deduction. And so Larry is not using any of his $11.58 million exclusion amount. And you're right, Pam, I would have caught this if as we went through the process. But even though we don't have to file an estate tax return within 9 months of Barry's death, if we do and make the appropriate portability election, then Pam, when you die, perhaps in 2026, then your estate, which could be $17.58 million at that time, will get to take advantage of your $6 million basic exclusion amount, and your estate will be able to take advantage of the $11.58 million exclusion amount that Barry's estate didn't utilize. And that way you'll be able to exempt $17.58 million from the 40% estate tax instead of just $6 million protected from the estate tax. So, so they move along and they get all of that done. They file the estate tax return that wasn't required to be filed, but in order to take advantage of the portability election, it had to be filed on a timely filed estate tax return, which essentially means 9 months after Barry's death. They do all of that. Pam has the $12 million, grows to $17.58 million over the next 6 years. She dies in 2026, just like in our previous example. She has $17.58 million. Because they made the appropriate portability election when Barry died on a, while not required, but intelligent to do so, estate tax return. Now when Pam dies with $17.58 million, all of it is exempt from the estate tax, not just the first $6 million, resulting in zero estate tax for the family. Okay, so that failure to file the estate tax return and make the portability election when Barry died cost that family $4.632 million of unnecessary estate tax that shouldn't have had to have been paid. So got a couple of morals of the story here is don't assume that your lawyer, that your accountant is going to be 100% up to speed with all of these portability elections and some of these estate tax rules, because most of their clients don't have to deal with it, because most of their clients don't have estates large enough that have to deal with it. But I'm saying here, and I came up with these numbers, that if your spouse dies and if your spouse has an estate of anywhere between $2 and $12 million, then portability is the one thing that you got to get just right. I realize it's a 5-syllable word, and I realize most people have never heard of it. It's fairly new in our estate tax system. It's just several years old, and then the the application of it with the exclusion amount going up and down was just in late 2019, some Treasury regulations were published. In fact, if Pamela was really on her game, she would walk into Larry the lawyer's office and say portability, and then she'd say, Larry the lawyer, you might want to look up Treasury Regulations section 20.2010-1, little c in parentheses, the number 2 in parentheses, 3 little i's in parentheses. So that would give, it would give Larry a starting point to go check on some of these things. So again, you can't necessarily rely on that family lawyer who does a little of everything for you to really understand this. This is stuff that's in the bowels of our IRS Treasury regulations, and just not everybody is aware of it. Thank goodness I do these videos, and I can force myself to kind of keep myself up to speed on this so that I can give you some accurate information. The other thing I don't want you to assume, real important here, is don't assume you'll ever see another one of my estate planning educational videos unless you slam the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and then give it a big thumbs up. That's what YouTube likes to see. That's what gets me excited when I see those subscriptions and those likes go up. Gets me motivated to make more educational videos. And then just tune in every 10 a.m. Central Time every morning. More estate planning educational videos to come. Contribute with your comments below. Share this video with others that you think it might find helpful, and we will see you tomorrow. 5 syllables, portability. Remember that.